Masechet Sukkah, Daf 36. A few very interesting topics today. We're going to be comparing the Etrog once again to some laws about animals. We saw that as a theme, but we're also going to compare the Etrog to rocks that are used like as toilet paper, and that's a weird comparison. So that'll be a warning to sometimes comparisons are just technical, not necessarily so symbolic. We're also going to see a fascinating story about a rabbi who took a bite out of his etrog and then he shook it. And we're going to end off with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who thinks that the four minim are used not only for shaking, but that you have to make the sechach out of the four minim. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Really fascinating to interweave both of the mitzvot of the holiday of Sukkah as well as the arba minim. And so we begin at the top. Nistak nikav. The Mishnah mentioned a whole list of qualifications and disqualifications for an etrog, and one of them is if it's split or pierced. So about that, Taneh Ula Bar Chanina, nikav nekeb mefulash b'mashehu, she'eno mefulash becheisad. When you say it has a hole in it, that's a problem, what size of a hole? Well, it depends. If it's a hole that goes all the way through, then even if it's a tiny hole, but if it does not go through the etrog, through the flesh, then it would be the size of an isad. So this is an isad coin. It's a Roman coin. It's about half an inch in diameter. So here's a picture to show this. So if you have even the tiniest bit that is pushed all the way through like a pin, then it's no good. And if it doesn't go all the way through and it's just indented, pressed in, then that's okay as long as it's not bigger than that size. It seems that this would also conjoin with the other law that it can't be missing any part of it. If any of the flesh is missing, that would be an independent problem. Okay, good. So that's the first law. Now the second one is going to be very interesting. Taneh Rabbi. What if an etrog has some of the signs that makes an animal a terepha? An animal as terepha means that usually after you do shechita, you open it up and you look inside and you see it had some disease, some sickness that it would not last, it would not live for 12 months. Therefore, that animal is not kosher, cannot be eaten, cannot be used. So that there's a whole list of simanei terepha, about 18 different things. And the question Rabbi has is, do those disqualifications or apply also to an etrog? So at first sight, this seems really strange. Why are we comparing an animal, the health of an animal to make sure that it's healthy and will live, compared to an etrog, which is, first of all, not alive, it's plucked off the tree, and we just want the etrog to be beautiful. And it seems to be two completely different categories. So I think we have to chalk this up to another one of our list of where the various rabbis are specifically comparing etrog to animals, because as we shake the lulav and etrog, it is in a way kind of like bringing a korban. We remember that the lulav and etrog was especially the Sukkot was especially a Bet HaMikdash holiday. Probably the most people out of any other holiday came for Aliyat Laregel. So you're bringing it to the Bet HaMikdash and encircling the Mizbeach. So I guess for that reason, it's very connected. And now we want to know, even in the details, is it connected? So now we have first we want to clarify Rava's question before we can answer it. What exactly is he talking about? We know there's lots of laws about an animal. One of them, iniklaf, if it's peeled. So one of the laws of Terepha, this is a little bit gory, so sorry. If you skin an animal while it's alive, then that becomes terepha. This is not unhealthy. I mean, besides the sar balei chayim that would be involved, if for some reason this happened, this is terepha, it would not be a kosher animal. So we know that's a law regarding an animal, but we already said this law, right? This was the last thing that we talked about yesterday, that if etrog is entirely peeled, then that is also not hadar and invalid. So we know that already. So Rabbi wouldn't be asking a question about that. So how about the next one? Tanena, we learned that already. Inistak tanena. If you're talking about one that has a slit in it, well, we already learned that. The Mishnah mentioned that that's no good. So you wouldn't have to ask that. The slit one means like this. Here's a picture of an etrog that has a slit down the middle. That would be invalid. And here's a picture of an animal that has the same law. If its esophagus has a slit down the whole thing, broken, then this you open it up and you find this. You can't tell unless you have an X-ray machine. Then that's a terepha that cannot live. So I mean, one's inside, one's outside, but nevertheless, if that's the comparison you're trying to make, Rabbi, we already learned that one, and we know that a kind of etrog is no good. So third try, inikav tanena. If you're talking about something that has pierced, that has a hole in it, we learned that also. We know an etrog that has a hole in it is no good. And so to an animal that has a hole in one of its key organs, like in the membrane of its brain or something like that, then that animal is also taref. So in all these cases, there is a similarity to the animal and the etrog. But these are all known already, so Rava can't be asking about that. So what case is Rava asking when he says, is it true the etrog is like an animal that's a terepha, one of the simanim? So here we go. Here's the answer to explaining the question. He's talking about the health of the inside of the lungs that can be poured out like a pitcher. In other words, if some of the flesh, some of the tissue inside the lungs became damaged to the point that they're liquefied, maybe we call it like water on the lungs. So in the case of an animal, it's okay, it's permitted because, I mean, it's a little sick, but we assume it can get better from that. Now, a side point, this is a complete tangent. Says this is true when Rabbi Yochanan says that an animal with lungs that have some water in it is kosher. That's only when the bronchia are still intact. So mostly it's intact. It's okay. But if even the bronchia are no good, then it is terepha. Okay, but we're not talking about that case. We're talking about a case where it's a little slushy in there, but it's mostly okay. Hachamai dilma hatamhu de la shalit ba'avira hadar bari aval hachad shalit ba'avira sadochem esrachat or dilma lo shena. That's the comparison. Now, etrogim, as last time I checked, don't have lungs, but they do have an inside. So the question is, if the inside of the etrog became, instead of a nice, citrus structure, if it became damaged inside and turned into liquid and slushy, is that okay for an etrog? Like it would be okay for an animal that has only partial damage to its lungs, or no? So here's the two sides of the question. Maybe over there in the case of the animal where there's no air, they are talking about lungs, but the point is that it's enclosed and therefore it's protected. And so the air will not further damage it. So the animal might get better, right? It can heal itself. But here, regarding the etrog, the etrog is subject to the air. Air has germs in it and will cause it to oxidize. So the etrog, if it's already slushy inside, is no way it's going to get better. It just means that sign of decay is going to only get worse. So is that true that the etrog is worse than the lungs? The lungs are okay, kosher, but the etrog with the same amount of slushiness is not good, or it doesn't matter. Maybe they're the same law. That was Rava's question. Okay, now that we understand the question, we're going to attempt an answer. We're not going to succeed. So we're not going to end up having an answer to this question. But here's the attempt. Tashema. The attempt is going to come from a long baraita. This baraita is itself going to be subject of the next discussion. So pay attention to every detail of the baraita. Etrog tafuach saruach. If an etrog is swollen or decayed, we'll see what those two terms might mean, but two types of decaying. Kavush, if it's pickled, for sure, if in brine, according to some Rishonim, even if you put it in water for over 24 hours, that's called kavush. Kavush. Shaluk means if it's boiled, right? Kushi, a darkened etrog. The Gemara is going to discuss, does it mean that the etrog was grown in the land of Kush in Ethiopia, or it's any etrog that turns black because it gets dried out? I think it means the second here, but we'll see. Lavan, if it's white, umenumar, if it's speckled, we saw this law already, if it has spots on it all over. Pasul, all these are no good. Okay, so etrog, so those are no good. Etrog kadur pasul, if it's round, it's also not good. We want the etrog to have a nice etrog shape, like a pear shape. Some say also that a twin etrog, like a Siamese twins, as in this picture, that is also pasul. Etrog haboser, and etrog that is unripe. You plucked it off the tree while it was unripe, still green. Rabbi Akiva posel, hachamim machshirim. That's a machloket. Rabbi Akiva is machmir, but the majority opinion says it's okay, and we saw that already. That unripe etrog is okay. This is a really cool idea. What you do is, while the etrog is still small on the tree, you put a mold around it, and then it grows into the shape of the mold. That sounds like chicken nuggets made out like in the shape of moon and stars. I don't know how they get it that way. So if you do that and you make it like an entity, and you look at this and this is a star-shaped etrog, that would be weird. That seems like a new thing. And that would be pasul. We have a picture of this, of what this might look like, but we're going to get to it in the Gemara. Okay, anyway, that's the Braita. And now we're going to try to prove something from this. Remember the lungs. Ketane mihat tafuach saruach. Mailav tafuach mibachutz, v'saruch mibifnim, as two words for its decaying. So maybe swollen means on the outside, saruach means it decays on the inside. So that would mean if the etrog is liquefied on the inside, then that's one of the things in the list of the Braita that are pasul. And so that would mean we can answer Rava's question. Rava mentioned that we interpreted his question to mean that the animal with lungs that are a little bit liquefied is kosher, but the etrog, which the inside is liquefied, is not kosher. So you see that there is a difference between the laws of Terepha and the laws of etrog. So can we derive that as an answer? No, lo idi v'idi mibachutz, not necessarily, because both of these words, tafuach saruach, might mean different levels of kinds of decay, but from the outside, and they're not talking about slushy liquid in the inside. And etrogim can decay in different ways. Sometimes it gets swollen, even if it's not decaying. Sometimes it starts decaying without necessarily swelling. So either of these are pasul, but they're both talking about the outside, and therefore we have no answer to Rava's question. So Rava asked a question that was difficult to figure out what the question was, and in any case, we have no answer to it. But that's the end of Rava in the comparison to Terepha animals. All right, but now that you mentioned this nice long baraita, we're going to go into this baraita. Amar mor etrog kushi pasul. In the baraita, it says that this kushi etrog is invalid. The Mishnah also mentioned it. So I'm going to call this statement that of the Mishnah. But here's the problem. We have another baraita that contradicts it. V'hatanya kushi kasher. Dome lekushi pasul. The second baraita says that kushi etrog is okay. If it's similar to a kushi, it's pasul. Now, what can this possibly mean? Let me tell you what I think is the pashat, and we're going to see the two answers, which I think fit well. I think this baraita is expanding on the Mishnah. When the Mishnah said etrog kushi pasul, that Rashi thinks that it means it comes from Ethiopia, and the etrogim that come from Ethiopia are dark. That's what Rashi says. And that seems a little strange that the same species of fruit, just because they grow in Ethiopia, should have a dark skin color. It's not like people. So I would rather explain, and other commentaries also explain it this way, that there's two things we're talking about. An etrog, a regular etrog, yellow, green, that comes from Kush. And the second issue is of something a regular etrog that becomes darkened because it gets dried out. So when the Mishnah said etrog kushi pasul, it meant a dark colored, a black colored etrog. Talking about the color. The Baraita is clarifying that by saying kushi. Don't think that if it comes from Ethiopia, it's a problem. Kushi means if it comes from Ethiopia, happens to be grown there, that's a regular etrog. It's fine. What we mean is domele kushi pasul. If it's similar to a kushi person in that it has a dark color, that's what we're talking about. That etrog is pasul because it's dried out and became dark. Okay, so I think that's what the Braita means, and that's in fact similar to what the answer is. Amar Abaye. Kitanan name matnitin domele kushi. Abaye says yes. The Mishnah itself, even though it says etrog kushi pasul, what it means to say is if it's similar to a kushi person, then it is pasul. And so really the Braita is explaining the Mishnah. The Mishnah is not talking about something that comes from Kush, but something that is similar to a kushi person. And so they are in agreement. And I think Rabbi is saying also something similar. Rabbi Amar, lakashya, halan vehalehu. This phrase usually means halan, this is for us. In Bavel, the one thing is true. Over there, something else is true. It seems that in Bavel, even though Bavel is farther from Ethiopia, I think there was a trade route over sea, and so some of the etrogim came from Kush, from Ethiopia to Bavel. So this Baraita is talking about the people in Bavel, where we have etrogim from Kush, and so those are okay. And if it's, however, dark like a Kushi person, then that means dried out, it's no good. The Mishnah, which only mentioned etrog kushi, is talking about something that's darkened and therefore just is not good, and doesn't mention the one from Ethiopia because they didn't have that in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, there's other interpretations of these statements, but I think this one is the most straightforward. All right, excellent. Now, by the way, for halacha, this halan v'halahu is understood to mean if you look at if you have a totally black etrog, it's no good. But if it's just darkened a little, it depends on where you are. If most of the etrogim where you are have a somewhat dark color, then it's okay. But if all of them are light and only yours is dark, then it's no good. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or maybe of the holder, right? So that depending on where you are, there's different definitions of what's beautiful or not. All right, now we get to the next thing in that Braita that said that etrog haboser, etrog that's not ripe. Rabbi Akiva poser v'chachamim machshirim. That's what the Braita said. Amar Rabba, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon, amru davar echad. Rabba says, here is something interesting. Rabbi Akiva, who says that an unripe etrog is no good for an etrog, perhaps that's because it's not a fruit. It's not yet a fruit because it's not ripe, not called a fruit. Rabbi Shimon says something similar, even though he's talking about a statement in Ma'aseh. Let's see what these two statements are. Rabbi Akiva hadamaran, Rabbi Akiva we just said. Rabbi Shimon, Maihi, what do you mean Rabbi Shimon? Detanya, Rabbi Shimon poteret etrogim bekotnan. Rabbi Shimon says that if an etrog is very small, you don't have to take Ma'aseh. So it seems like they're saying the same thing. How come you don't have to take Ma'aseh from these etrogim? Because they're so small and they're so unripe, and therefore they're not considered yet a fruit. And so just the same reason that they're not considered fruit and therefore you don't take Ma'aseh, Rabbi Akiva says they're not unripe and therefore it's not a fruit, you can't use it for a mitzvah. So it seems that they're in agreement with each other. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's a student of Rabbi Akiva, so it would make sense that they were agreeing with each other, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is just applying it to a new case. However, we reject this. Amar le Abaye, right? That was Lord Rabba. His student Abaye says, "Dirma lohi ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Akiva hachad de'enan hadar veleka." Says no. The reason Rabbi Akiva doesn't allow an unripe etrog to be used for mitzvah isn't because it's not a fruit. It is a fruit. The problem is it's not beautiful when it's unripe. Aval hatam kerabanan sibirale. But regarding Ma'aseh, he may very well agree with Rabbanan that you do have to bring Ma'aseh because it is a fruit. Regarding Ma'aseh, it doesn't have to be beautiful. So in fact, Rabbi Akiva is not like Rabbi Shimon. And the other way around also. Iname adkan lo kama Rabbi Shimon hatam ela dichtiv aser ta'aser et kol tebuat zar'echa kederech sheben adam osiin lezri'ah. Maybe Rabbi Shimon is machmir, or actually it's mekel, regarding Ma'aseh that says if it's unripe, you don't have to take maaser from it because the pasuk says, take maaser from all harvest that you can plant. Tevuat zarecha. Could have just said tevuah. Now, when can you take a piece of fruit and plant it so that it will grow again? Only when it's ripe, then it will germinate. If you try to take an unripe fruit and plant it, it's not going to grow. So therefore, you only have to bring maaser when it's ripe and to the same degree that a person would plant it. So that's a special law regarding maaser, and that's why he doesn't consider it necessary to take maaser from unripe fruit. But he may very well agree that regarding etrog for a mitzvah, that even if it's unripe, it's still considered a fruit and totally fine, and you can use it. And so he may not agree with Rabbi Akiva regarding the reason using unripe etrog for a mitzvah. He can agree with Rabbanan. Okay, so we tried, but Rabbi thinks that they correlate. Abaye thinks that these two opinions do not correlate. Betulamidi, and the Gemara says, and there's nothing more to discuss here. Interesting phrase, like it seems to be saying, we agree that there's no correlation and don't try any further. Okay, that's a cool phrase to look up to see where else that appears. Now, but I mentioned if we put a mold around the small etrog and it grows into that, if it looks like a different being altogether, then it's no good. That's only true if it becomes like a different species. But if it still looks like an etrog, it's okay. Now that's Rava's big chidush. Well, peshita kimin birya acheret, that braita just said if it looks like a different species, then it's no good. If it looks like the same one, obviously it's okay. Why? What's his chidush? His chidush is that even if you make it look like many planks, it's still okay. So here's an actual etrog that might look like that. I think it might be easier to tell in this drawing here. Oh, by the way, here's a picture of lungs with the bronchia and stuff. Okay, but here's the etrog we're talking about. Let's say you take a mold like this, and then it comes out with lines, like thick grooves in it. So you see, it could be very beautiful if you do that. Now this just really adds to the beauty, but you still look at it and say, it looks like an etrog. Maybe you can even find an etrog. Etrogs are known for their bumpiness. That's what makes them so nice. And you just want to smooth them out and make it look even more beautiful. Rabbi says that's okay. The Braita wasn't saying that this is a problem. Okay, I think it's interesting. People used to do that. I wonder why people don't make fruit into different fun shapes. Maybe kids will eat more fruit if they do that. Itmar, next topic. Etrog shenekavu achbarim. Okay, this is not related to the Braita before, just a new topic. And etrog, that mice came and they were nibbling at the etrog. Is that okay? Amarav en zehadar. It's not beautiful anymore when the mice took it. Okay, that's Rav. Ini, Rabbi Chanina matbil ba v'nafek ba. Hold on, Rabbi Chanina, he used to take his etrog, dip it in some kind of sauce, and then he would take a bite out of it. And then he would use it for the mitzvah and shake it. So he took a bite out of it. So it seems that it's kosher, even though he did that. And this seems to contradict what Rav said, because Rav said if mice nibble at it, it's no good. Okay, now this whole thing is surprising because Rabbi Chanina, what do you mean you're taking a bite out of your etrog? Rabbi Chanina, kashya matnitin. The Mishnah said that if it has a hole in it, it's no good. So how could you ever even think that Rabbi Chanina would be okay to take a bite out of it? There's another problem altogether, which is you're not allowed to get benefit from a mitzvah. It's from the etrog. Because once you designate it for a mitzvah, you can't benefit from it. So it could be a case where he was not planning on using it, so he took a bite out of it, and then his other etrog, he lost it, it wasn't around, and then he decided to designate it. Okay, that's an easy problem to solve, but this one is a difficult problem to solve. How can you take a bite out of it and still say it's kosher? So first we have to square off Rabbi Chanina and the Mishnah. Bishlama matnitin Rabbi Chanina la kashya. Kan b'yom tov rishon, kan b'yom tov sheni. When the Mishnah says that the etrog has to be whole, that's only on the first day. As the pasuk says, ulkachtem lachem bayom harishon, and we interpret ulkachtem to be two words, velakach tam. You have to take it whole, perfect, but that only applies to the first day. On the second day and forwards, it's okay if it has a hole in it. Okay, good. But the second day and forward. In Galut is a question how this applies. When we have Yom Tov Sheni, the second day of Yom Tov is technically like the first. So does that mean if it has a hole in it, or if it's missing the pitom, or all the other things, is that like the first day and you have to be machmir? Or since it's the second day and it's still the whole second day is the Rabbanan, then is it permitted? And then you can use it going forward. That is a machloket rishonim. Okay, so now we solved this problem of Rabbi Chanina. That's how he took a bite out of it because it was the second day. Now, how about Rav? Ela Rav kashya. Rav, how can you say? Now we understand Rav is talking about the second day also, and say if the whole time it's no good if mice. Why not? So what is missing? It's only the second day, and Rabbi Chanina said you can take a bite out of it. Rav says, I agree with Rabbi Chanina, I'm not contradicting him. Rabbi Chanina, he took a bite out of it, so that's not disgusting. But mice taking a bite out of it, then that's disgusting. Nobody wants to touch this anymore. And so it makes a difference, right? In both cases, there's something missing, but how it became missing, if it's just missing because of a person, it's okay. Because of mice, that makes it disgusting. All right, that's one version of what Rav said. Now we have an opposite version. According to this version, Rav said, even if mice nibble from your etrog, it's still okay, it's still beautiful. And now the story about Rabbi Chanina is not a question against Rav, it's actually a proof. After all, Rabbi Chanina, he took a bite out of it, so same thing, mice taking a bite out of it. According to this version, there's no difference between people and mice, it's permitted either way. But we still have the problem in Mishnah. What about the Mishnah that says if it has a hole in it, it's no good? How could you say if you took a bite out of it, it's okay? Same answer. On the first day, it has to be totally whole. On the second day until the seventh day, if it has a hole in it, or you took a bite out of it, or mice ate a little bit, it's all permitted. Okay, fascinating story. And now the last thing about this Mishnah, Etrog Katan, the smallest Etrog, Amadav Rafram Bar Papa, Kemachaloket Kan, Kachamachloket Bavanim Mekurzalot. So regarding Etrog, we had a machloket between Rabbi Meir. He said it could be the size of a walnut. Rabbi Meir, even the size of a walnut. Rabbi Meir says, no, that's too small, it doesn't look nice. It has to be the size of an egg at least. That was the machloket. And now Rav Rafram says the same two opinions apply not only regarding etrog, but also regarding these rounded stones that people would use to wipe themselves after they went to the bathroom. This is in terms of Shabbat. Detanya, Beshabbat, Shalosh Avanim Mekurzalot Mutar Lachnis Lebet HaKiseh. On Shabbat, you're allowed to bring 3, not more, only 3 of such stones into the bathroom with you. Problem is you're carrying, they're also mukseh, but because of kavod haberiyot, the honor of people, we don't want people to walk around dirty and smelly. So the rabbis allowed violating these Rabbanan laws in order so the person can be clean. Now you can use 3. The kama shiurin, and how big can they be? In this case, we're talking about the maximum size. So Rabbi Meir Omer ke'egoz. In this case, Rabbi Meir is actually being machmir, and he says the maximum. We want to minimize the violation. So just bring a walnut size. That's sufficient for you to clean yourself. Don't bring anything bigger. Rabbi Akiva says that you can bring it as big as an egg size, and this just happens to be the same sizes that they use for that they say for etrog. So it's hard to figure out conceptually what the comparison is. Maybe it's just a mnemonic that happens to be the same, or maybe they said it regarding one context, and then someone said, "Well, apply it to the other context." Maybe they're just talking about how big is something significant, and goes is significant or just not significant to be called something that's usable. Maybe it's just as simple as that. All right, but interesting comparison. And lastly, b'gadol kedesh yochaz. What's the largest, the largest etrog that one can bring? And we saw again 2 opinions there. Rabbi Yehuda says has to be small enough that you can hold 2 in one hand. Rabbi Yosef says you can even be so big that you need 2 hands to hold one. And we're going to bring a proof. Tanya Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says I have a proof for me. Ma'aseh Rabbi Akiva. Sheba lebet haKnesset ve'etrogo al kitefo. Rabbi Akiva came to Bet Knesset, and his etrog was so big he had to carry it on his shoulder like a big package. That's how big his etrog was. So you see, I'm right. Rabbi Akiva had a giant etrog. That's not a good proof. In that very story, the other sages said, hey, Rabbi Akiva, what a kind of grotesque, huge etrog is that? That's not a beautiful etrog. So you see that the majority of the rabbis were actually like me, Rabbi Yosef says. All right, great story. It's in the picture I have behind me, which is from the Bar Kochva coin. The etrog is actually quite small, even though this is that was Rabbi Akiva was Bar Kochva's Rabbi. So but maybe that's just because it's hard to find such big etrogim. But Rabbi Akiva thought it was nicer to bring a nice big one. All right, now we're gonna begin the next Mishnah. And Ogdina Talulav Ela Bemino. So we completed all the discussion of the 4 minim, each one of them with their own disqualifications. And now we're going to bring the Arba minim together. When we bind them together, and remember, the Yehuda is the one that says you must bind them together. You have to use something from its own species. You have to use one of the 4 species to bind it together. So you take a piece of the palm leaf and you use that. Rabbi Meir said, disagrees and says, no, you can use a string, a cord, you can use anything, even if it's made out of different material. And he has a story to back him up. The people of Jerusalem used to bind their lulav together with golden rings to beautify it. This is really nice. Just like today, you see people have silver etrog boxes. This is nice to put golden rings on it. And gold is not one of the Arba minim, and yet it was permitted. And they told him, no, what you didn't see. First, they tie it with regular lulav cord. And then on top of that, they put gold. So the gold is not actually the binding. The gold is just the decoration that they're putting on top. The binding itself is in fact made of the Arba minim. And so that the story that you tried to bring for your proof to Rabbi Meir is actually a proof for the Yehuda. Something interesting about this Mishnah is that it looks like it's a machloket between 2 individuals, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, and yet at the end of the story, the Amru law, there are many sages saying that no, you have to have an eged. They had an eged that was made out of the mean. So it sounds from here like the majority of the sages, at least in this story, follow the Rabbi Yehuda, even though today halacha does not follow that. Okay, now Amar Rava, we're going to see a series 3 statements by Rava. Amar Rava, afilu besiv, afilu bikara detikla. When we say that you have to use something that's from mino, you can use any part of the palm tree. It doesn't have to be necessarily from one of the leaves. Even if it's some of the fibers or even the trunk, right? You take the trunk itself is fine. Okay, then he also explained, it seems that from the fact that he's saying this, it seems that he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, and he's just expanding that says you can use any of the fibers in the tree. And what's the reason for Rabbi Yehuda that you have to use one of the minim? We saw this already. Because it's required to put to bind it, and if you bring a different species, bring gold or something, then you're adding to the mitzvot. You bring 5 different species, and you're not allowed to add Baal Tosif. So because it's necessary, it would be Baal Tosif. According to Rabbi Meir, that you don't need an eged, therefore you can use anything because you don't need it at all. It's just there for convenience. Good. That's now the third statement. Amar Rava. How do I know? I want to prove my first statement that you can use the fibers or even the trunk of the date palm, or even though you can't take a trunk and shake it, but for binding, it is okay, and it's not considered adding a new species. How do I know that? The following proof is going to be a bit long. The proof is only going to come all the way at the end. But in the meantime, we're going to see something really fascinating. The Tanya, here's the Braita. Sukkot teshvu, Sukkah shel kol davar diber Rabbi Meir. So Torah says you have to sit in a hut, and the hut can be made out of anything, according to the Rabbi Meir, right? I mean, the walls can be made of absolutely anything. the roof, we saw the qualifications, has to be something that grows from the ground, but you can use any type of wood, leaves, anything you want according to Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, en Sukkah noheget elu b'arba minim shebalulav. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that you have to take the 4 minim and use them for sechach. Sechach has to be made out of myrtle leaves and aravot and lulavim. That's the only thing that you have to put up there, and you can't use any other species. Really fascinating, kind of beautiful idea to join together the 2 mitzvot. In fact, there is a custom. Some people like to shake the lulav in the sukkah to also join together both of these mitzvot. Now, how do we know that? What's a proof? This is all within the Braita for the Yehuda. V'adin noten. Uma lulav shenoheg belelot kabayamim and no noheg ela barbaminim. Sukkah shenoheget belelot kebayamim and odin shelo tehe ela barbaminim. Well, listen to this kavachomer. Lulav applies only not during the day and night, only during the day. You can't. There's no mitzvah of lulav at night. So therefore, you see, lulav is a little bit more lenient in that you only need to bring it at night, and yet it's restrictive in that you have to bring only these 4 species. So if that's so, sukkah, which is you're obligated day and night. So sukkah is more stringent. So all the more so, we should apply the same restriction that the sukkah can only be made from the 4 species. So that's the kal vachomer. All right, sounds like an interesting kal vachomer, but they reject it for a very important reason. Amru lo kol din shata dan techilato lachmir v'sofo lakel eno din. If you ever make a kal vachomer, and the result of the kal vachomer is that you're going to end up not only with a chumrah, but also with a kula, with a leniency, then you can't make that kal vachomer. So what does that mean? Let's see what the example is. Lo masa arba'at minin, yeyoshevu batel, v'atorah amra basukot teshevu shivat yamim, sukkah shel kol davar. So let's say you have a case where you can't find the 4 minim. You're out in the desert, you can find other trees, but you can't find these 4. So now, according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to end up with a kula, because you're going to say, I don't have the 4 minim, I'm not going to make a sukkah, so I'm not going to take the lulav and etrog, I'm also not going to sit in the sukkah. So your stringency ended up with a leniency that when you don't have the 4 minim, you don't do anything at all. But yet the Torah says, sit in the sukkah. And now you are violating, you're not getting a chance to do this mitzvah. So it's okay to make a kal vachomer, but anytime a kal vachomer is going to lead to a leniency, when you're trying to make a stringency, then it undoes itself. That's a very important rule. And, a lot of times a stringency in one area ends up triggering a leniency in a different area. And here's a proof that you can, in fact, use anything on the roof, because it says Seu hahar v'aviu aleh zayit v'aleh shemen v'aleh hadas v'aleh tamarim v'aleh as avot v'asu sukkot kakatub. We saw these pesukim in Nehemiah when they're reading the Torah for the first time and the people don't even know about it, and they have to do sukkot, and it says, okay, everybody go out and gather together, and it lists 5 different species, and only 3 of them at best are among the 4 species, right? Hadas and temarim, ale etz avot, that's the same as hadas. But these other ones, ale zait, ale etz shemen, what are those? I mean, maybe it's piri etz hadar, but it's not the piri, they're bringing the leaves. So these things, these 2 are certainly not the 4 species. Even the hadas and the ale etz avot, one of them seems like it would be something else, not the actual, what we call hadas. So 2 or 3 of these are not the 4 minim, and yet the people are going out to the mountains and gathering them together for what? To build their sukkot. So this is a proof that you can make a sukkah out of anything, other items, not only the 4 species. Okay. Now we're going to answer. How is Rabbi Yehuda going to explain this pasuk? He says, the rest of them are for the walls. That's what you'd bring, the aleh zayit and the aleh shemen, the walls you can make out of anything. But these, the hadas and temarim and etzavot, those are among the 4 species. Those are for sechach. So some and some. So even Rabbi Yehuda can explain this. Okay, good. Now that we finished that, we can get to the Rabbi's proof. Utanan mesakechin benesarim diber Rabbi Yehuda. Way back, if you remember, Rabbi Yehuda was also of the opinion that you can use boards as sechach. Because remember, he said that you can make it even like a dirat keva. The same Rabbi Yehuda, he's the one in the first Mishnah that says you can make it higher. Rabbi Yehuda is very important in this whole masechet. So now he said you can make boards. Where are you going to get boards? You can't get a board out of a myrtle leaf, right? You can't get it out of aravot, but you can get a board out of the trunk of a palm tree. Alma siv ikara dedikla mina delula bahu shema mina, and based on that we can derive that yes, in fact, you can use any part of a palm tree for the eged, for binding together, because right, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that said you have to use the 4 minim for the sechach. And he also happens to be the one that says you can use boards for sechach. How you can get boards from the 4 minim? It's from the trunk of the tree. Since that's permitted, even though you can't take a board and shake it, but you can use it for sechach. Therefore, I can take any part of the tree, including its trunk, any fibers anywhere on the palm tree, and use that to tie it together. And now that we tied up the sugya with that little bow, we can end here. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.